Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings, and joining me, making his return to the podcast, he's my favorite ex-Mainer living on South Beach. It's Adam Berger. Adam, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be here and talking some wrestling.
Yeah, and in today's episode, and we'll just jump right into it because it's a concept I've been toying with for a long time. And what we're gonna do essentially today is we're going to be trimming down AEW's roster. And what do I mean by trimming down? I am not one of those people that is inherently obsessed with the roster size of AEW. They got to cut guys, they got to trim it down, they got to make it simpler. I know that's been a kind of a mantra not since the company first started, but once they started really aggressively signing free agents and bringing in more and more people, that has been consistently something people have brought up is that, ooh, AEW has too many people. I don't necessarily think that AEW has too many people in terms of just the sheer number of people they have. But what I do think is that AEW could be well served by transitioning some people out of the company in order to move people up the card. Um, and this stems from a general sense that AEW has a lot of promising talent that they've brought in over the years, and that talent doesn't always get enough TV time. That talent doesn't always get enough creative focus because there's just so many other people in the company, and it becomes difficult for those people to kind of matriculate up the card in a organic and reasonable way. We see some younger stars have their momentum stalled out. We have, their programs start and then end, and then all of a sudden they're kind of left twisting in the wind. And so I wanted to do like an exercise where here's what we're going to do. I have 20 names written down on a piece of paper. All of these are AEW wrestlers. I am tasking Adam with getting rid of 5 of those names. That's what I told him when we were doing this. So Adam needs to get rid of 5 of these 20 names. And we're going to go over them one by one, and he is going to make the decision of whether or not to let them go or not. And the game we're playing here is that Adam does not know these names. Only I know these names. And that we're going to go over them one by one. So Adam has to be prepared for getting to that number of 5 people that he is going to have to get rid of it from AEW. Uh if we get to name 17 or 18 and Adam's only gotten rid of 3 people so far because he wants to keep them all, um, then we're looking then the kind of the catch is you might be a name coming up 18, 19, or 20 might be someone you actually really want to get rid of or you really don't want to get rid of, and you can't get rid of them. You have to get rid of them because you haven't hit that 5 minimum requirement. I hope I think I did just an absolutely terrible job explaining it. But Adam, you're aware of what we're doing here, right?
Yes, it's a little bit like start, bench, cut, and also a blind tier ranking. It's kind of like a combination of those two things.
Yeah.
But there's
Yes.
just five. There's 5 people we have to send on an excursion, shall we say? And by the end of it,
Yeah, and here's what I want to emphasize with this here. The first point is that I think that um this kind of movement in wrestling is healthy. It's healthy for wrestlers who have been with the company for a while to move on and go somewhere else. It creates opportunities for other wrestlers to step into that position. And it also maybe serves some of the, and we'll get into this, serve some of these wrestlers that maybe have gone a little stagnant in AEW to go somewhere else. So I don't want to view this as like a inherently these people suck and need to be gone because I don't out of the 20 names I have listed here, I think all of them have talents and purpose, and some of them have been really valuable to AEW at times. So I don't want to make it seem like this is going to be like maybe there are people on here who will talk about having more of a negative role in AEW at this point, but this is not an exercise on like the worst. We're not looking for like the worst people in AEW's roster to get rid of. We're looking at people that maybe have hit a ceiling in AEW, people that have maybe kind of run their course, kind of had their storylines, complete, and would be better served to go somewhere else. And it would also create another opportunity for someone else to come into AEW that's fresher and has a chance. So I want to emphasize it's not inherently like a negative exercise.
Yeah, and I think if you think about like the way territories used to work, where wrestlers would come in, they'd work somewhere for X amount of time, and then make it pretty much as far up the card as they could. And then when they started to slide down the card, they'd be like, all right, it's my time to leave. Then they'd go somewhere else and start the process over again. And unless you were like one of the select few who territories would be built around for multiple years as the main protagonist, everyone was kind of moving around from place to place. And because wrestling the last 20 years or so has been really dominated by, at least in the US, by one or two companies, wrestlers just kind of stay in the same place for a really long time. So they get stale, the roster can get stale, which means the storylines and some of the cards can get stale as well. So AEW now, it's been around for 5 years, and we're starting to see, there's some guys who they were at a certain position when the company started, and here we are 5 years later, and they're still in that same position as when the company started. Or there's some other guys that might have peaked and then have kind of fallen down the card a bit, and because they got stale. So yeah, I have no idea who you're going to list or who we're going to talk about, but yeah, I think it's a fun exercise. And by the way, whoever I end up cutting, this we'll probably get into it, but this doesn't mean like I hate them or think that they should be fired. It's more just, hey, I think maybe they could benefit from using some time somewhere else and open up a spot for someone else to do something new in the company, and then maybe after some time goes by, they can come back. I mean, honestly, I just think wrestling in general needs more turnover to keep things fresh.
Yeah, like you said in the territory era, historically, not a lot of people would be in the same spot for 5 years, which is what we're talking about with AEW, a 5-year-old company. And some of the names on this list are day one hires. So we're talking about a pretty like a long run in a company that I think in the last 10 or 15 years, the way WWE has held on to a lot of their names, especially guys like in the mid card, um, has kind of like made it seem like you just kind of stay in a company forever when that has rarely been the case throughout the history of pro wrestling. Um, and I think that's really important to keep in mind that this is try and again, this is like all of this is very like hypothetical. I don't really there are some people on here that are maybe more likely to actually leave than others. There are probably people on here that are never going to leave AEW and in 20 years they're still going to be in the company. Um so it's of course all a hypothetical exercise. And the other thing I want to point out is that I think some fans view this as like view it too much as in the sense of like AEW because it's their favorite wrestling company, or maybe it's the only wrestling company that they watch on a regular basis. Um, is like the if a wrestler is not there, they don't matter to them. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think if all of these people were to be released by AEW, they would go work in another wrestling organization. Maybe it's WWE, maybe it's New Japan, maybe it's TNA, maybe it's on the Indies, maybe it's somewhere else. Like and so like it's not like these I never want to see these people wrestle again or that these people are going to go away. But I do think a lot of fans sometimes view it as like if wrestler X leaves AEW, they're dead to me or they're going to be a failure wherever else they go because they're going to go to WWE and I can just write them off or whatever. And that's not the case. I think all these people would continue their wrestling careers elsewhere, and it doesn't mean that you would never see them again if they were not in AEW.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started. Interesting to hear who
All
these
right.
names are.
And the last thing as I was coming up with this list, Adam, I said you got to cut 5 people. Um I think you should cut 8 people.
8. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm going to up the stakes a little bit as a surprise. That the number is now 8. It is not 5. Let's get some people mad at you. I of course will not be giving out my picks because I don't want to get people mad, but I'll let you take all the heat. Um by doing this. Um, no, I'll share my who I picked at the end. Um, and so I'm raising the total from 5 to 8. And the other thing, um, we'll discuss maybe who was and who wasn't on this list at the end. But one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to pick people who were currently, or at least very recently, performing a role in AEW. There are people. There are no. There are in a role of value, because kind of the idea is I want to like take the TV time that someone else is getting and give it to someone else. So I don't want to like I'll say right now, like Kip Sabian is not on this list because Kip Sabian really isn't like like a really character of any prominence within AEW. I don't know how many he's probably had what 5 television matches this year, if that. Um, so he's not really like someone that I'm looking to like get rid of, just because like obviously you could cut Kip Sabian and it wouldn't be that big of a deal for AEW, but it wouldn't also really create an opportunity for someone else, if that makes sense. So I'm looking at people who have some role within AEW that are providing some, value to the company in some way, as opposed to just like who are the lowest people on the roster, like your Serpenticos or your even like someone like Tony Nese, but really people who at some point have been protected in AEW and are a real figure on the roster as opposed to someone in a very minor role, if that makes sense.
Oh man, no easy selections then, it sounds like.
Well, some of them might be easier than others, and we'll
Right.
start with one. Um, the first person I am giving you is Kill Switch. How do you feel about Kill Switch?
Ooh, okay. So Kill Switch is I think he's very good in the role that he has, but he is not someone who is going to like he's not someone you're building around in the future. And he's also not someone whose status I would expect to really change in terms of like where he ranks in the overall AEW hierarchy. So he's someone who's he's a role player, right? If you think about like, we're both basketball fans. If you think about basketball teams, like, you need someone, you need to bring in guys with the mid-level exception. And that's kind of how I view him, as he's a good guy to have, and especially if you have like a specific role for him. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. It seems like AEW so often like doesn't really have roles for a lot of people or kind of know how to use them, but he's someone who from day one they had like a very specific role for him, and ever since then they've always found good ways to utilize him continuously for the past 5 years.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about him now, I think when he first started, I think when I first saw like Jurassic Express as a team, my thought was this could be a really successful team, like with children, like kids, 12 and under, 10 and under, because I think the combination of Jungle Boy, Marco Stunt, and Luchasaurus were like, they were basically like a Saturday morning cartoon, like tag team to me. Um, and I think if AEW was a company that kind of drew from that demographic, they would have had a much higher ceiling, but because they're not necessarily like a family friendly company. I don't think they've really ever tried to cater towards children. Um, like that kind of put a cap on, I think, like the Luchasaurus character in the entire kind of Jurassic Express. Because I think like if you took Jurassic Express and put them into like if you put them in WWE or put them in like 80s WWE, I think they would have had like a really successful run. And not that they weren't successful in AEW. I was actually a really big fan of the quality of their tag team work when they had the tag team titles. But I think that put a kind of a cap on where he could be. And so they transitioned him into this heel muscle character with Christian Cage. And it's a good act, but um it doesn't seem particularly essential. And if you had a large but still green wrestler that you wanted to do more with, that kill switch role would be pretty enticing to put someone into.
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that. Like if you had someone who fits that like that mold as like the Diesel, like what Diesel was to Shawn Michaels, as an example. The interesting thing with Killswitch though is because he's been there for so long, he kind of feels a little bit to me. He's like AEW's version of Kane. Like he's been there forever and he's always doing stuff, even if it's not necessarily like the most critical. roles, but he's kind of like a mascot almost because he was kind of a day one guy. So yeah, I think as long as I think obviously in reality, like as long as he's performing his role well, that they'll definitely have a spot for him. I think because he was a day one guy. And then you mentioned like yeah, maybe if there's a big guy who has potential, he might be better utilized in that role. The problem is like there just aren't a lot of people that size or wrestlers that size, and a lot of the ones who are pretty bad. Like I don't. It, isn't like Satnam? Is he not a wrestler anymore? Is he just like doing announcing? I remember seeing something about that recently. I
I
don't know if that's true or not, but
oh
like
no,
he.
I think there was like a something weird on the AEW roster page where he was moved to the announcer section. Um, but if anything, I think he's been wrestling more frequently than he was
Oh, okay.
before. Um, I've seen him do a couple matches on Rampage and Collision, and he's been wrestling in AAA. Um, he's had like like several matches in AAA this year. So,
Okay.
um,
Okay. Yeah, but just as an example, like yeah, so he was someone that obviously they had a lot of, thought pretty highly of in terms of potential. They debuted him in a pretty big spot, but he's never, and some of this might just be just not having a lot of reps or practice because AEW has, they only have so many matches based on their distribution model. But Killswitch is a different level of worker than
yeah,
him.
he can easily, Killswitch can really work to the AEW standard, especially in tag matches. He's a really good guy to come in and get that hot tag and do, his spots where he does some of his athletic stuff and uh yeah, so would you is he going to be, you have to cut 8 people. Is he going to be one of them?
You know what? I think I'm probably going to regret this, but I'm going to say no. I'm going to
Okay.
say no. I'm going to
No, I
keep him.
think when you discuss it, it's you made a very compelling case, I think, to his value and kind of what he has done and what he can do in AEW and how they've used him. So I don't think it's controversial to say that you keep him.
I think part of it too is because he's always been showcased and always had a role. Like he's other than when he's been injured, he's constantly on television. Has always had a role. They have a lot of equity built up in him, so he's not one of these acts that has kind of been harmed by maybe like losing all their matches or just disappearing for extended periods of time. It's easy to involve him in things and have the audience care about it, where it might be more difficult for people that are on and off screen frequently or just disappear for long periods of time.
Mhm. Yeah, he's been really pretty, like you said, like pretty consistently used. Jurassic Express was, had a good run for a few years. And then, the program with Jack Perry turning heel, aligning himself with Christian, that's a good spot for him to be. So I think that's a logical pick. Um, number 2 is Samoa Joe. So we're going in a different direction here. And again, I want to keep in mind, like if you were to take Samoa Joe out of this company, he's someone that has won the world title. He is someone that is when he's, he was actually just appears to be written off television for an extended period of time. But when he's around, he gets plenty of TV time as a I would say like upper mid card character, relatively protected, wins a lot of matches. If you were to get rid of him, that would open up a pretty big opportunity for somebody if you wanted to push further. But what are your thoughts on Samoa Joe?
Oh man, I love Samoa Joe. I mean,
I love him too.
one of, he's been one of my favorite wrestlers for like literally 20 years now. So yeah, I'm just gonna spoil it and jump to the end. No, I can't emotionally handle that. But
And now
I think he probably
he is older too. His how many more years of Samoa Joe are you going to get out of him?
well, that's true. But one thing I would say is because they've built up equity in him by actually giving him a world title run and having him win a lot. Like he didn't lose much. He only lost to like Punk and who else he lose? I think he Darby, right? He lost the TNT title to Darby, maybe Wardlow
Like in
as
terms
well.
of lot. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's lost matches here and there. Like he lost to Punk. He lost to MJF
Oh yeah, that's
at
right.
Arthur Ashe. He obviously lost to Swerve. Um,
Yes. So it's only like the really the top guys or guys that are really pushing have beaten him, and he's such a good promo. He just makes people care about whatever he's doing. Like there's not that every time Samoa Joe gets pushed or is in a big spot, someone on social media shares that clip of I can't remember, it was like mid 2010s WWE where he just cuts down like four or five guys in the ring, just ethers them with his promo, which is always a fun thing to revisit every once in a while. But yeah, he's because they've built up so much equity in him. Now it's kind of he's the guy like we were talking about territories earlier. He's one of the guys who they build him up. He has his headlining program, and okay, now he's on the way down, and he's gonna put over some people that are on their way up, and so there's definitely still a lot of value in having him around.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love Samoa Joe. I've had many pleasant things to say about him this year on this podcast and in writing. I think I'm going to vote for him for the Hall of Fame this year, which I have not done before. It's honestly like he's kind of made me revisit how I evaluate the Hall of Fame, and we'll talk about this more during Hall of Fame season. But when I think of Samoa Joe, I just think of someone who's been an outstanding pro wrestler at every phase of his career. Um, and whatever weaknesses he has in his Hall of Fame case, I can attribute to poor booking and some of the worst decision makers in modern wrestling history being in charge of his career, uh, as opposed to anything negative about him. And I still think he's a hugely valuable figure in AEW. And hasn't really been like overexposed, I don't think.
Well, I think part of that too is because he has that twisted metal job where he goes away for a while, and so he gets time off during the year and then comes back. I think that actually is a great example of how AEW might benefit from just even if people aren't injured, just hey, like take a few months off. So maybe like you're outside of maybe the tippy top guys that you want around all the time. Everyone else just like, yeah, we'll just, you'll only wrestle for 9 months, right? Or be active for 9 months. We'll give everyone else like a mandatory 3 month vacation or something. I think
Mhm.
there could be something to that, and he's kind of a good example of how people can talent can stay fresh if they go away for a little while and give the audience a chance to miss them.
All right, we'll move on to number three. And this is one of the people who has not been on AEW television recently, but obviously when they are around fulfills a pretty significant role in the company, and that's Sammy Guevara. How do you feel about Sammy?
Oh, I like Sammy. I think he got kind of a bad rap because he was miscast as a babyface during that infamous feud with Scorpio Sky a few years ago, and then it's just kind of been all downhill for him from there. So he seems like someone that's kind of peaked already, which is crazy because he's still relatively young. And obviously, he's, very athletic. He definitely has charisma. Not the best promo. Like he's not someone you want to send out there to do a long promo segment, but in shorter stuff, he can cut a solid promo. But yeah, it seems like he just kind of lost a lot of momentum. Some things went awry. He's had some backstage conflicts that resulted in him getting suspended at kind of the wrong times as well. So yeah, he's an interesting one for this type of conversation. I think honestly, in reality, he could probably benefit from going elsewhere and working somewhere else for a little while, and then maybe coming back in the future.
I think he's definitely. I think his first year or two in the company, I think, was really strong. I think he was in a really good position as kind of Jericho's, uh, lieutenant in the uh,
Inner circle.
the inner circle, and but I do agree he was. Tony seemed really intent on making him a babyface star, and he's just not. He doesn't have the personality for that. He is a natural heel. That's where his charisma is. It's in that kind of role. The AW fan base, I think, is a little too smart to be manipulated into just cheering him based on generic babyface actions. And I think you mentioned like the suspensions coming at a bad time. I think the whole thing about the proposal to his fiance on doing that on AEW television, and then breaking up with her, and then dating Tay Conti. And I think a lot of people in the very online crowd did not like that, right? As he was supposed to kind of take off as a babyface. And that kind of really hurt his prospects as a top babyface in AEW. Um, and it's just never been the same for him since he's kind of been in that role. Um, he's kind of gone back and forth. He's turned, it feels like he's turned a bunch of times. I don't know what the actual count is, but it just feels like he's been a heel, he's been a babyface, he's teased turning one way or the other, and then only to remain the same. He kind of just keeps going back to being a Jericho ally because that's his best role. Um, but he's someone that I think his last few years have been hugely disappointing in AEW, and I think that a change of scenery would really benefit his career, no matter where that was.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think it's easy to forget, but like when he beat Miro for the TNT title, he was actually over as a babyface. Like he
He
was
was, yeah,
he had momentum going, and then it really was, I think, the like you brought up the Tay Conti thing, his previous, proposal to his ex-fiance being like that was definitely something. But then also just he is such a natural heel, and that Scorpio Sky feud just I think that was combined with the Tay Conti relationship coming so soon after his previous relationship ended. But man, that Scorpio Sky feud just completely turned everyone against him. Maybe probably a combination of those two things, but he just came off so dislikable in that, and he's kind of just had to be a heel basically ever since. I think he's like you said, he's turned a number of times, but it just seems like since then he's just kind of been gradually becoming less and less important. I think some of that is just more like new people coming into the company and maybe outshining him. Um, then there was less depth in the early years when he was really standing out. So things got kind of more competitive as the years went on and more talent got brought in. And he kind of stayed at the same level. He didn't up his game the way like someone like Swerve has. If you look at like when Swerve first came in, what type of wrestler and performer he was versus where he is today. Obviously, he was very good when he first arrived, but he also continually got better. And that's something that doesn't seem like it's really happened with Sammy. He hasn't developed at the same rate as some of his contemporaries. So, yeah, I think a change of scenery would probably do him good.
all right, so I'm gonna check you're a yes on Sammy getting the boot.
Yeah, he's my first one. Yes.
All right. Adam hates Sammy Guevara. Tweet that out. Let's everyone tweet that out. Um,
Want him to go on an excursion. I don't want him fired. Just send him on an
n-
excursion,
no, he's someone that I think would benefit from not even if he's one of someone that I think if he went to WWE it might work out for him.
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that. I could definitely see it working out for him. He could like you were mentioning earlier, a lot of these people that we're talking about could be successful in a variety of different places. And I think he just does need a change of scenery at this point. But yeah, I could totally see him, getting over really anywhere, like, Mexico, Japan, wherever. Like he is very talented. It's
Yeah,
just
he is a really hard worker in the ring. Like he has gone out there and he takes crazy bumps. He really works his ass off in every match he's in to get over to try to get over and give the fans entertaining experiences and things like that. Like I think he's worked extremely hard. It just this, some things happen in your career, poor timing on some things and the creative not always being there necessarily, and you can make some dumb mistakes because you're still in your 20s, and it just kind of fizzles out. And I think that's kind of where he is. It'll be interesting to see because I assume he's coming back to AEW. He's been out for quite a while. What kind of role he's put in. If Tony is still insisting on him being a babyface, I don't think it's going to work out. But if they have kind of a new idea for him as a heel, I know there were those vignettes of a masked character that they teased on Dynamite, and I think Guevara. I don't really know how believable it is, but I just saw Guevara's name being tossed around as a possibility. I don't think they would bring him back in a mask, but who knows? Um, but yeah. Number four, speaking of people in masks, number four is Ray Phoenix.
ooh, okay. This is interesting. Ray Phoenix is an incredible wrestler. He's so good. Obviously, when day one AEW, well, I don't know if he's necessarily day one, but very early AEW person.
Mhm. Essentially,
Yeah,
essentially a day one character.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's been there. He was there like on their first Dynamite episode for sure, and definitely some of the pay-per-views before that. So yeah, he's a tremendous wrestler, but he's kind of like they had their tag team championship run, the Lucha Brothers, with that won it at that amazing cage match against the Young Bucks a few years ago at All Out. Had their run were also the saved the trios division at least temporarily when the
Mhm.
Elite got suspended after Brawl Out, and then had a great series of matches with them. So I mean, he's someone who he never needs to go away. Like he's always going to be over to some degree, at least as long as his work rate is as strong as it is. So like he's always going to be someone who people enjoy seeing on shows because his matches are good and they're fun. But he's definitely someone who I think has probably peaked already in AEW, unless he was to get like some sort of a singles push, which could happen. It's not the craziest thing to think like, oh yeah, we could push Ray Phoenix, but at least in terms of him and Pentagon together as a tag team or as a trio, I think they probably need to break up if they're going to have any hope of making it to the next level. Otherwise, they're just going to kind of stay in the same spot that they've always been, more or less, for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think with Phoenix, he's super reliable, and I think he's really kind of shined in a lot of these. If you go back and look at a lot of the AEW pay per view matches, uh, or AEW pay per view cards, and look at some of the multi man matches, whether it's tag team, whether it's one of those ladder matches, whether it's just like a four-person scramble or something like that, he has always been like a really reliable performer in those kind of settings, and that's like a huge part of AEW. It's a huge part of their history is having these like really wild, fun multi-man matches with guys doing crazy spots and the crowd going crazy for them. And he is as integral to those kind of matches as really anyone else in the company. And he doesn't seem to be slowing down. It doesn't seem like that's something that he could not do for the near future. I do think like there are other people that you could put in that kind of a role that um for injury reasons have not necessarily been around all the time for that role. And that's allowed Phoenix to stand up. But say if you were to get rid of Phoenix, you think about some of the people you maybe slide into that, fun multi-man role. You could look at someone like obviously El Hijo del Vikingo, either Darius or Dante Martin, Action Andretti, um, Bandito, who's been out injured, Commander. Um, there's, even someone like a Nick Wayne. There is a role that you could give to somebody else. Not all of, I don't think any of those wrestlers are as good as Phoenix, maybe Bandito. Um, but if you wanted to say like, all right, this guy's hit a ceiling in AEW, which he probably has, it could be beneficial to give that space to someone else.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because he's kind of the opposite of Killswitch. Like we were talking about earlier, Killswitch is limited in what he can do, but he fills a specific role, and there aren't many people that can fill the role that he does. Whereas Phoenix is not limited. Like I think he's probably capable of a lot more, but the role he's in is one that a lot of different guys could potentially fill. None of them, with the exception of Bandito, in terms of who you just mentioned, could fill it as well as he does. But it's an interesting question for
Well,
this. So you know what?
with some of the younger guys, I think they might have a higher ceiling long term.
Potentially, yeah,
Yeah.
potentially. If it would give them an opportunity to develop and a higher chance of reaching that ceiling. Honestly, with the exception of maybe Nick Wayne, I'd be very surprised if anyone else you mentioned ever became as good a wrestler as Ray Phoenix is now.
Mhm.
But Yeah, I think all right. I think I am going to say he could go on excursion. Like I think he would benefit from time away from AEW, and I don't think AEW would necessarily miss him significantly. I think he's really someone who he would benefit from some time away doing some stuff elsewhere, and then they could potentially bring him back with like a plan for doing something more significant with him. So you can add him to the list of people that I hate, um, based on what I just described.
I know you're trying to twist this at him and saying these guys are going on excursion. These people are being fired. Just want to make
Well,
that
Tony
clear.
Khan, Tony Khan's not going to run out of money. I don't. We need our
Yes. Well, yeah, we're not. Yeah, this is
we don't care about the budget. Our thing's more about, hey, these people could benefit. Like, hey, these people have been around for a while. Let's freshen up the programming for us as fans,
yeah, this is
and get
not.
some new people on there. Like, I like if Tony Khan wants to pay them to go wrestle elsewhere, good. I hope that would be wonderful.
Oh
So
gosh.
yeah,
Yeah, this is not Shad Khan bursting into the AEW locker room like Oliver Platt in The Bear saying, "We got to fire 8 people because this budget is too high." Um Number 5, it's Max Caster, who I think has become a very derisive character within AEW. And this is not Max Caster and Anthony Bowens, or this isn't the Acclaimed as a group. It's simply just Max Caster. I have a take on Max Caster, but I'll be interested to see how you think he fits in here.
yeah, he's going to be someone on my list. He can go. Um, I'm just not a. I think he's gotten stale. I think the act has gotten incredibly stale, and I think them being a trio with Billy in their matches like really hurt them a lot, because part of their appeal and when they were getting over was, yeah, they would do these raps and they were a little bit silly. Sometimes the raps would be more biting and clever. Other times they'd just be, kind of silly. But then they would actually have like, some really good matches as a tag team. But then once they became a trio with Billy, their match quality got a lot worse. And also they suffered from just having they wrestled like the House of Black and the Bang Bang Gang for like a year. Like they had two programs in a year that just never ended, it felt like. And then also, remember this time last year, like the big angle was whether or not Billy Gunn was going to retire, as if that the AEW audience should strongly object to that for some reason. So yeah, I think he would definitely, honestly, like, yeah, he would probably benefit from a change of scenery. And I think at least, the people that we talk to as AEW fans would be happy to not have the Acclaimed as regularly featured on AEW programming.
Mhm. I think that Max Caster's gotten a bad rap. I think that I personally, just from watching the shows, don't think that like the Acclaimed are stale or overexposed. I think that they are still over. I think that they get loud reactions in the building. I think that they still have a lot of merchandise. I think the people are into their acts. There are parts of it that I don't particularly care for, but I don't necessarily think that's Max Caster related. Um, I think that they are a fun, organically homegrown team. And I think Caster is a big success story in AEW. And I think part of this is people would think that if you get rid of Caster, that could free up Bowens for maybe more singles work, if that's the direction you want to go with him. And I get that, but I don't think I think some of the criticism towards Max is, obviously people have their own personal opinions on him, but I don't see him or his act as particularly problematic to AEW. I think he's over and popular. Um, and so I would be keeping him if it was me. Um, I think
You
that
know, I was just gonna say, ironically, who the Acclaim kind of remind me of. I guess maybe it's the New Age Outlaws.
yeah.
like there is a danger with that though, because the act is always fun in a live setting, but after a certain amount of time, like you have to come up with new ideas for it. And so at a certain point, I think sometimes like the call and response type reactions can end up like actually hurting the overall product. Well, we actually just went through this last year with MJF and Adam Cole and the Brochachos. Like they got
Mhm.
great reactions, but people really didn't like. There was definitely a downside to what they were doing in terms of like how it impacted the overall product and the interest in the storylines, and that sort of thing. And I know that's not, it's tough to like prove that conclusively, but there was definitely like a tone shift. And sometimes, a lot of times, Dave Meltzer's talked about this a lot, is it takes time for the numbers to catch up, like in both directions. Like if something's hot and it's getting cold, or if something's cold and it's getting hot, the numbers always kind of lag behind it. And obviously the acclaimed are not like the top act, so like they're not responsible for drawing ratings or selling tickets necessarily. I'm sure they probably sell a bunch of merch, which is why the act is still together and being featured regularly. But yeah, at a certain point, things do get stale and you got to reinvent yourself. And I think we might be reaching that point relatively soon with them. But yeah, I mean, to your point, there definitely still get reactions in the building. So there's definitely another side to that argument that I just made.
I also thought their much maligned rap video on Wednesday was funny. I think I'm the only person in the world that thought that, but when I watched it, I was laughing. Um, the and I also think just the AW, the AW tag team division, which used to be really deep, is not that deep, and I'd be wary of getting rid of or breaking up a team that's at least familiar and popular still. Even if maybe they could be phased down a little bit, um, if that's your choice. But I don't think the tag division is necessarily in a position where we should be breaking up some of the few recognizable real teams that are left in that division. Um, Number 6 is another wrestler who hasn't really been around that much lately, but I think is a really important person as part of this discussion, and that's Ricky Starks. Um, Give me your spicy Ricky Starks take, Adam, and please know that there are some people that are really hinging on what you're about to say here.
I think they completely dropped the ball on him after All Out last year.
Mhm.
That match he had with Brian Danielson was absolutely incredible, and they had invested a lot in him. Like he was, one of the main guys when Collision first started. He, had that feud going with Punk, which, Punk got fired and Brian had to finish it, which is a pattern through both Punk and Brian's career as Brian cleans up Punk's messes. But yeah, and then I really liked his tag team with Bill, and I thought they had like a cool Shawn Michaels Diesel dynamic that they didn't get that much television time when you think about it, or like a lot of storylines. Like they squashed FTR and they just kind of had the belts, but they didn't have, like, if you look at their cage match, they didn't have that many tag team matches during their tag title run. And the ones they did have, I think Full Gear, like they were tag champs. It was just like some random multi-team ladder match, and then they were supposed to, it seemed like, drop them to Jericho and Omega before Omega got diverticulitis, and they just kind of held on to them until it was time for Sting and Darby to become tag champions for Sting's retirement match angle. So he just, I don't know. I think they really dropped the ball on him, and he's capable of being a top guy. Now he always hasn't like knocked everything out of the park that he's done himself. He's had some underwhelming performances. Sometimes he has some disappointing TV matches for sure. But I don't know. I still really believe in him and in his potential, and I kind of wish AEW felt as strongly about him as I do.
I think he was really unfortunate. I think out of like in terms of like individual talent, he's one of the biggest losers in the whole CM Punk thing, which for all intents and purposes of available information that's out there, he had absolutely nothing to do with it. But he ended up being kind of a victim by it, even though he ended up having that great match with Bryan Danielson. It wasn't the culmination of an intensely personal feud that could have put him over bigger, like what seemed to be working with CM Punk. And I think that was kind of the derailment of his career, and then the tag team run. And I agree that um, his the creative has not always been there for him. And I think that, like, if you were to go like a year ago, like last spring, and you were to say like, who is more likely to be AEW World Champion in a year, Ricky Starks or Swerve? I think a lot. I would have said Ricky Starks. It seemed like he was on that trajectory. Um, and to see how things have gone for him have been almost like kind of like a worst case scenario, um, in terms of what like how far it seems like he's fallen. But at the same time, I do think because he's been off television for a while, it maybe has been a healthy. If he is to come back to AEW, we don't really know what his contract situation is. Um, the time awake is a healthy reset for him, and he could come back, and you could kind of, I think the crowd would be into him when he comes back, just because they're almost always into to somebody when they come back from a lengthy layoff, and he'll be over, and it'll be a clean slate for him to go back up the top towards the top of the card, because I do think he has top guy potential. And those aren't really people you want to get rid of, especially because he really, again, like, he hasn't really been overexposed. He hasn't been on television for a million years. He wasn't, an ex WWE guy. He is a real young on the younger side talent. I don't think he's like super duper young, but he's also not old. And so I still think he has a really valuable purpose in AEW. Um, he's someone that I think if he goes to WWE, if they put him on the main roster right away, he's going to be a huge success too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I honestly, he's one of the guys who, as we're having this conversation, like I'm talking from the perspective of AEW. Like I would definitely want to keep him,
mhm.
and he's one of the guys I'm keeping. From his perspective, I think he might be better off going to WWE because I mean, a lot of the people that they push there are not nearly as talented or as charismatic or as good on the mic as he
No, I
is,
mean,
and I think he
Solo
could really
Sokoa is about to main event a stadium show in
well.
WWE.
Well, Ricky's not Samoan, I don't think. So that he might have a hard time getting into
Right,
one
but
of those spots. But yeah,
Damian Priest has had a long world title reign. Like, it's like I would think if I was running WWE, I would look at my roster and be like, geez, we need some exciting young talent that we can push quickly into the main event. Um, that's ready for that role. And I would look at someone like Ricky Starks, who again has never been on WWE television before, and say, wow, that could be our guy. So it might be beneficial for him to leave AEW, but I'm in the same boat as you in terms of, you know, how valuable is this guy to AEW? And I would say he has the potential to be very, very valuable, if the creative can be sorted out for him, and things can go a little bit smoother for him. Because again, you know, I think that Punk feud was really going somewhere, and then he kind of had to he lost it, and then kind of got shifted into the tag team division, and just isn't wasn't the positive direction for his career that it needed to go. So
yeah.
he'll
And
be
the thing with the tag, I was gonna say the thing with the tag division was I really like that hit the chemistry he and Bill had, despite like never working together before, like was really good. I thought it was really criminal, like that they didn't just have like a squash match every single week where they just, AEW does squash matches on TV all the time. Like, why weren't those guys murdering jobbers in like a few seconds and then talking shit about it? And then they just build up a streak of all these dominant wins. And then when a team is competitive with them, it actually like means something. And then I thought they really missed an opportunity to build them up as a significant team so that when they did drop the titles, it really meant something. But I think part of that was also just like that tag team seemed like it was really just a placeholder for other people. And it ended up because like other plans got disrupted, they end up holding on to it way longer than was initially planned. So yeah, I agree with you. I hope Ricky Starks comes back to AEW and has a great run and reaches new heights. But I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, especially with some of the allies he has in high places in WWE that might want to work with him over there.
Mhm. Number 7 is Brody King.
Brody's awesome. I'm definitely keeping Brody. I can't. I have to keep Brody. Brody has so much. Brody reminds me of he reminds me of Brody Lee when he was Luke Harper in WWE, where you watch this guy and you're just like, man, that guy's big and he's really good, and he's just kind of in this like, he's in a good role, but it's like, man, if they ever like really got behind this guy, I think he's capable of much more than this, which fortunately we got to see Brody Lee prove with his time in AEW after he left WWE, and hopefully Brody King doesn't have to leave AEW to prove the same thing. But he's definitely someone that I would want to keep and potentially push more in the future.
Yeah, I agree. He needs to get out of that group. I think that's the stop and start nature of how House of Black have been used, and I don't know how much of that is a AEW creative issue and how much of that is a various uh aspects of the other his teammates in that stable. But I would like to see him just as a more consistent regular TV act. I think that he not only is he really good, but I think he gets over in those matches he's in. Any match he's in, not only is he a really exciting wrestler and he's got tremendous size and he's very athletic, but the crowd is into him. The crowd is into seeing this guy kick ass. And when you have a guy that looks like that, can work like that, and has that kind of crowd connection, that's someone that you really got to capitalize on. I think he did a really good job in the Continental Classic last year. Love to see him get a similar opportunity. It just kind of feels like he's in a holding pattern because of the way they use House of Black, but he's definitely someone I would keep.
Yeah, he's great. He's great, and I think he's capable of much more, and hopefully gets the opportunity to prove it. But
Mhm,
I'm really looking forward to the Continental Classic again this year, and I think hopefully he's healthy and can play a key role in a similar way they did last year.
mhm. This next person who I think would have been an obvious cut up until very recently, but now is a more interesting person to discuss, and it's good old Jeff Jarrett.
Double J, Double J,
And I should
man.
add that for for the intents and purposes of this exercise, we are not counting any like backstage role uh, that these people have. It's purely like their utilization as an on-screen figure in terms of whether or not we want to retain them or not.
Yeah, I've never really had much of an issue with how Jarrett's been utilized in AEW because he's been, he's kind of a comedic heel uh, type guy. He's never actually been pushed. Like they used him, he's actually gotten quite a bit of TV time, or not as much lately, but at least before the Owen
I was gonna say,
Classic.
what do you mean not as much lately? He's been,
I
but
meant
yeah,
before. Yeah, there
he
was
was
a,
on a
there was a
pay-per-view
period.
streak. He was on like 4 straight pay-per-views.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, like with the Owen, and their usage of him there was absolutely perfect. Like he was
Yeah,
very moving and got people to care way more about his match than like anyone else, his first round match than anyone else could. Got heat for Hangman. Like he was perfect in his role, absolutely perfect. He's very talented, has a ton of knowledge. But I guess with all that said, the point of this exercise is to say like, all right, could TV time be allocated better to open up spots and be less stale? Like I think at this point he really has probably like accomplished everything he could really hope to accomplish on AEW television. Like I don't think it's necessarily going to get better from here. I think this Owen thing that he just did was probably the peak, and you can really only do that once. So I think just in the interest of knowing, like I'm gonna have to cut about 50%, he's going to be on my cut list. But I actually have enjoyed his run. Probably could have used maybe 20-30% less matches than he had on TV during his run. But yeah, I have enjoyed it overall. But yeah, I think like opening up a spot for someone else, he's someone I'll put on my cut list.
Yeah, I think in Jarrett's defense, like, I think, you said that he's kind of done everything that he could probably do. He's his ceiling in terms of what he could do in AEW. And I would tend to agree with that statement. But at the same time, if you made that same statement a few weeks ago, I would say, yeah, I mean, he's probably kind of done everything that he would be capable of doing in AEW. And then this Owen stuff happened. And it's like, ooh, actually, Jeff Jarrett suddenly has value again. So I wouldn't necessarily write him off in that regard. I also just uh, personally like enjoy he's like the really like become this really unique figure in wrestling just because he has these old little tricks that he has from being a legit territory guy that there's very very few if any of them left in pro wrestling. And so especially during his heel work and things like that, he has this old school Tennessee style to him that really comes across in his work that if you're a deep fan of pro wrestling and have studied it, like he really it's really easy to appreciate some of the stuff he does that I think make him stand out from like almost anyone else on the roster and anyone else in wrestling just because he's the last of these style of workers. Um with that being said, I think like you look at like TV time and he was on that pay-per-view streak where he was getting on these pay-per-views and it's like, man, Jeff Jarrett's getting a lot of TV time. um, but I it would mean that I wouldn't be able to hear my world as much as I do on television, which would make me upset. So I'd have to
You
weigh that
you
as
just,
well.
you just have to watch more Triple Manias. That's all.
That's right. He'd still be in the Can I hear the audio on Triple Mania or do they mute it?
That's a good question. You might have to play like the song on your phone as he comes out. I'm not sure, but
I was gonna say, I'm like, is it? It seems like one of those ones where like the crowd is like they turn off the sound for his entrance like they do in on CMLL and some New Japan wrestlers. Okay, number 9, moving someone who's I think like roughly half of Jeff Jarrett's age. It's Hook. Give me your hot Hook take.
ooh, wow. Okay. Hook's very interesting. Like when he first started, I think we all thought, man, this guy's like an immediate star, and the sky's kind of the limit with him. And then he kind of just kept having the same type of matches. And then over the last year or so, year and a half, he's definitely expanded the types of matches, the length of matches that he's having. He sells now, like he's not just like dominating jobbers like he did for so long. So, but with that said, he hasn't really developed at a really strong rate. So it's really difficult for him to compete with in terms of like having his performances stand out both on the mic and in the ring relative to the rest of the roster when there's so much talent on the rest of the roster. So yeah, this is an interesting one. I think
Because
I don't know, I'm gonna have to think about this a
he
little
has
bit.
been protected, if you in the sense of like, there's only so many guys you can protect on a roster, and they do protect Hook a lot. He does not lose a ton of matches. Um, I think your assessment of him is fairly accurate in terms of he emerged looking like perhaps like a prodigy, but his progression has been very slow. Um, I'm not as concerned about the mic stuff as I think most people. I think he has a natural charisma, and I think he has a very authentic Gen Z kind of attitude that would resonate with younger fans. He's definitely never going to be like a tremendous, amazing promo the way some of the other guys are in AEW, but I do think that he has a level of inherent coolness that you just can't teach, and I'd be wary of letting a guy like that go.
Yeah, I think I'd be less concerned about his mic skills if he was a better wrestler, or I'd be less concerned about his wrestling if he was better on the mic. It's just so much of his success is reliant on being so heavily protected, and his entrance and that sort of thing. He has talent and he has charisma. To your point, he's also very young, and you can't teach charisma. Like people can develop it and get better over possibly, but there's no guarantee that ever happens. So when someone has it, you want to nurture that and see what they're capable of. But I don't know. He kind of reminds me. He's like Gen Z Ultimate Warrior a bit, and that's not really like what AEW, like those type of guys. They might have success for a while, but at a certain point, they kind of hit a ceiling, and people like, okay, well, what are you going to do now? Like we talked about like Swerve's trajectory and how he was in a certain role, and then his performances were so strong, he kept getting bigger roles and bigger roles and bigger roles until he's the top guy in the company. And I don't know if that's going to happen with Hook unless he gets more experience elsewhere. So I think I actually just convinced myself that he's going to be on my cut list.
Wow. He was an interesting one to put on. He was an interesting one to put on here, I think, for that reason, because I do think that um, he is a. I would be wary of cutting a guy with, I think, someone who has the potential crowd connection that he has, in kind of a natural badass aura that you just can't teach. I feel like I can get the other stuff out of him. Maybe it's more booking, maybe it's getting him some more international bookings where I think he could learn in a different environment. Um, honestly, I don't think his in-ring work is that much of a concern to me. I think he just needs to be put in a position to have better matches, if that makes sense. He has all, he does a lot of tag work. He does, some short matches and things like that. I want to see him. I'd love to see him in a G1. I say that about most wrestlers, just because I think the G1 is is the ultimate kind of showcase for how good someone can be. I'd love to see what he could do working in like that kind of environment. Um, so I don't know. Maybe that means he should. If I'm saying that, maybe he should go somewhere else. Um, but I would retain
Yeah,
somebody with his upside. That he, if I would give him a few more years. Like if we're talking about like contract renewal season, I'd give him like a 2 or 3 year deal, because I think he's so young that there's still a lot of stuff you could do with him that haven't been tried yet.
yeah, for sure. I think where we
And plenty
disagree,
of plenty of guys are not good promos early in their career, including many guys who went on to become very good promos.
yeah, I think the problem that I see is I just don't see him developing the way he needs to in AEW.
Hmm.
Like I really think he needs to go elsewhere for him to really like fulfill his potential. And I also question the amount of potential he has a little bit more than you do. Like you talk about his, like I agree, he definitely has charisma, but like in terms of him being like a badass and having an aura, that was so like he was that I think that a lot of that came down to how well he was presented and how careful they were with his presentation early on. And a lot of the way I judge talent just in general is okay, are they successful just because of them? And is that like portable? Like, would that be successful in other promotions and in other roles? And I don't know if that's necessarily true with him. Like, if he, like, just as an example, like we were talking earlier about Samoa Joe, how much we both love Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe can lose a match and you still think that you still know, like, okay, that guy's a badass, like it's obvious and instantly recognizable. I'm not sure I feel that same way about Hook unless, his matches are specifically designed for him to kill someone. Like if he has to be competitive and have competitive matches on a regular basis, I'm not sure he really gives off that badass vibe. And so yeah, I don't know. I just think a lot of his success is just much more reliant on a promotion, both protecting and prioritizing him, similar to what AEW did for Jake ago.
Hmm. Number 10 is Pac. And I guess what I'll say about Pac first is I think we will all agree that Pac is an elite wrestler. Um, and I would say the downside of Pac would be one, he has a ceiling that I think he's probably already hit. And two, he hasn't necessarily been the most reliable figure in terms of being around for television all the time, despite being essentially a day one hire. Um, but I think he which makes him, I think, a more interesting discussion point, because if we're just going based on like, is this guy like really good? Should this guy still be on TV? Obviously, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep Pac because he's just too good. There's certain wrestlers just like, all right, you can always find something to do with them. And I also think because like you were just talking about how he hasn't been necessarily reliable from a health or availability standpoint, but I think that it's actually helped him in some ways because he hasn't had the opportunity to get stale because he's, had his runs broken up where he's had time away, then he comes back and then something be around for a while, then something will happen, he'll go away for a while, then he comes back. And also I think his promos and his charisma, like this most recent run, I know some people didn't like his promo this past week where he talked about having his Wembley moments because they thought that was too much like talking about like a WrestleMania
I'll
moment.
tell you,
But
can I just say something real quick about that?
yeah,
Some people are like developing like this cornet like attitude where like if they just see something that's like WWE, they just like lose all like ability to analyze anything else. Like, and maybe it makes more sense to get upset about, showing Mariah May's face during a match too much or saying Wembley moment instead of WrestleMania moment than it does to get mad about like the Young Bucks slapping a thigh during a match. But I just think we've totally like lost control with some of this stuff in regarding to like if AEW does anything that reminds anyone of WWE, it's like this horrible thing that we need to talk about. And I find it not helpful towards overall analyzing the product.
yeah, I didn't have a problem with it because he was convincing when he said it. Like he was very passionate about it, and it sounded like something that was coming
Yeah.
from the
He's
heart.
a
Like
he's
he
a
was,
British guy. He wants to have a big match in front of,
yes,
a gigantic stadium-sized crowd in England.
yeah. But my overall point with that was I think his promos are improving, and that's very interesting to me. And he's not stale because he hasn't been around all the time for the past 5 years, and he's such a great wrestler too. He's fantastic. He's so much fun to watch. That yeah, he's someone I would want to keep around as long as possible.
Mhm. And I think, he's kind of interesting in if you compare him to Phoenix, who we already talked about in terms of I think Pac is like the next level version of Phoenix. I don't know if Phoenix can ever
Yes.
get there, but Pac is kind of this when he's there, an extremely reliable in-ring guy that's just going to go out there and he's not going to have a bad match and he's going to entertain the crowd. He's going to do some cool stuff. Um and I guess like you could also say that that's a good role for someone else to be in, maybe someone who might be a little bit more limited in the charisma department that probably prevents them from being a top guy, but they're a really really excellent worker. Um, but
Not like him though. It's just so tough to find guys who can work at that level. Like he's so good. He's so good. And like I I think with him there is something that's always kind of held him back from reaching like the Kenny Omega or Will Ospreay level of worker. I don't
mhm.
know if it's like a creative thing where like those guys are like starving artists and he just kind of wants to kick ass and he can do the moves that they do, but maybe he has a little bit more of like a Steve Williams or Dr. Death mindset than trying to create. He just kind of wants to do a little bit more smash mouth, meat and potatoes, a little bit more direct, mixed in with the high flying as opposed to going through some of these more elaborate spots and like a lot of like storytelling dramatics type thing. I don't know if that's part of it or not. I'm just a fan trying to figure this out. But so he hasn't ever quite reached that like hippie top tier of like, wow, this guy's like one of the best workers of his generation. But he's right underneath that. And every time I watch him, I'm so impressed with the things that he can do.
Yeah, I always say like I think what separates Omega and Osprey from their peers is you have two of the most coordinated, athletically gifted wrestlers ever that can just do so many amazing things in the ring from an athletic standpoint, combined with this really incredible desire to put on these types of matches and have these kind of take these kind of physical and emotional risks with what they're doing, and you combine that with you know top 99th percentile athleticism and in-ring ability, and I think Pac is there from an in-ring ability and athleticism perspective, but he just doesn't quite have that generational sense of drama and willingness to, I guess, part of it's just like a willingness to just totally land on his head. Um, and to really push the envelope of what people have seen in the ring before. That's kind of like an unfair knock on him, but um, not everyone had a lot. There were a lot of guys in the NBA that wanted to win, but only Michael Jordan. Not everyone wanted to win as bad as Michael Jordan. That's kind of what separated him from everyone else. Uh, um, so we're halfway through. You're doing good hedging here, Adam, because you've dumped 5 guys. You need to dump 3 more. Thank God I expanded the field to 8 because I thought 5 was too low and I was correct. Um, so we're heading into the second half here. And the next person
Well,
I have,
I was going to say, to be clear, I probably would have kept like definitely Phoenix if it was only
yeah,
5.
yeah, no,
But now
yes,
I'm like, all right, I got to be a little more liberal with this now with 8 because I don't know who's coming next.
yeah. So coming up next is Wardlow.
Okay. Um, what an arc to this guy's career, huh? Like he was like when we talked earlier about Kill Switch, the bodyguard role, he was so perfect in that for MJF. Just played that role to absolute perfection. He showed a lot of potential while he was in that role, like he was going to be capable of more. And man, like that angle and storyline he did with MJF, their breakup program, he was so hot during that. And then the whole plane story happened where all the attention was on MJF during their breakup match, and he squashed him like a bug. And a lot, like even Dave Meltzer was like, "Hey, we gotta like put the world title on Wardlow. This guy's
Dave was
hot.
very
He's got."
concerned. He's very concerned about Wardlow.
He was very, yeah. He was all in on like pushing
Wardlow needs
Wardlow.
to be fed is something he said, I think, on once per week on Wrestling Observer Radio, like for like 3 months. And he
Yes,
wasn't
and
wrong in sense of maintaining
no,
momentum.
no, he wasn't wrong. But what I talked about earlier with Hook, when I said I think probably a majority of his success is based on his protection and presentation as opposed to his talent. That is something that I think we saw with Wardlow because when he wasn't connected to MJF anymore and was on his own, he really struggled with that TNT championship run. He didn't like it wasn't a disaster. It wasn't like nobody cared about him anymore or everybody stopped liking him. People just gradually cared about him less and less as that went along. And because he was on his own and he had to, he had to stay over and get over more based on the quality of his performances. And he really struggled with that, both in the ring and on the mic. Now, the booking didn't necessarily do him any favors. Like, he definitely had some storylines and match type stuff that was, less than great. We can just, put it that way. Like he feuded with, I can't remember. Did QT Marshall only come in at the end with Hobbs? So maybe he wasn't really like feuding with QT necessarily. I can't remember, but I just remember being underwhelmed by a lot of his performances. And then I actually really liked his performance when he came back this year in Adam Cole's group. I thought his promos leading up to the Samoa Joe match were really good. But then he lost that match and just kind of disappeared. And I think all the start and stops have done him a lot of harm. And it would just be really tough for AEW to create something where he's taken seriously as like a top guy again after either they've dropped the ball or he's dropped the ball or they've both dropped the ball on his push so many times. So I think for that reason he's going to be on my cut list.
I think he's definitely hit his ceiling in AEW. I think that he has not. Um, I feel like I've had a pretty good read on him since he first came into the company. I just don't see a top guy in him. I don't think he has the charisma. I don't think he has the in-ring ability. I think the only way for him to have ever reached that status would be just as like this Goldberg like never loses kind of guy. And you can't kind of put the genie back in the bottle in regards to that because he's already lost so many times. And I think like what you said, I think the role when he came into the company and the whole patience they had in building up that MJF match, all of that was the perfect role for him. And once he kind of moved past that feud, it was hard for him to kind of stand out the way he did towards the end, as he did towards the end of that role. Um, and I think he is a reasonably talented guy with a good body, but I don't see that as being someone that is um automatically worthy of a quality role in AEW. And I don't think he has a lot of versatility, which hurts how you can use him if you're not gonna like push him as like an unstoppable force. Um, and that's something that you need to have in AEW, and he just doesn't. So, and I think he would benefit, going somewhere else, wherever that may be.
Oh yeah, he's definitely someone who like he's the guy who needs to probably most needs to go to WWE because
Yeah,
I'm
see,
sure
I don't.
they'll find something for him to do, and I do think he would be he could do well there. I don't foresee him ever being like a tippy top guy there, but I think he could be a guy on the roster who is regularly featured, who they protect. He could be like in a solo Sokoa-esque role. Like solo when not now, but like, a year ago, like in the bloodline, like the enforcer of a group type thing. I could see him doing really well on that.
Yeah, I mean, he could do that in just another setting. I just in WWE, I don't think his physical size would stand out the same way it would. Uh,
He's
if
bigger than
he was in.
Solo. They gave him that role. So
Yeah, well, Wardlow's not related to Roman Reigns, so
also true. Valid
yeah.
point. Valid point.
If we found out Wardlow was actually related to The Rock, um, then I would say he'd definitely be better off in WWE. Um, Number 12 is Buddy Matthews. We already talked about Brody King, one of his teammates in the House of Black. But how do you feel about Big Match Buddy here?
He's been disappointing, I have to
Yeah, I
say.
think he's
Uh,
he's flopped in AEW for me. Like as
I
far
wouldn't
as like
go. I wouldn't go that far, but
I
he
was he was putting on those bangers on 205 Live, man. People were so excited to see him outside of the WWE bubble. And he's been okay, but I wouldn't say he's one of like the 20 best wrestlers on the roster.
no, he's. I think he's been good in his role. His role is very limited, but he has been good in that role. But anytime he's had the opportunity to like have a big high profile singles match, it's underwhelmed to me. And there might have been like one or two that, delivered to whatever my expectations were, but it always felt like he underwhelmed a bit in those spots. So he's not someone that you're ever like, oh, wow, this guy's great. Like we need to push him more. Like the way he was in WWE, like when you'd see him work in WWE, it was like, man, this guy's great. I would really love to see him somewhere else to see what he's capable of. And then he got in AEW, and yeah, when he's doing those trios matches with the House of Black or some tag matches, he can show some of that same stuff. You're like, wow, this match is great. But then every time he gets a solo like spot, a chance to show just what he can do on his own, it's kind of like, yeah, all right, he's great at being like, the other guy in a tag team or, one of the guys in a group, but not really. I don't, I think he's definitely like what he is right now is probably just like the role he will always have.
Yeah, I think he's a not particularly charismatic, good wrestler. Um, he's one of those guys that put on a lot of size, and I don't think is as good in the ring from when before he put on a lot of size. He's not the first wrestler to ever be like that. I don't know. I was expecting like a lot out of him when he came in, and he's been okay. He's been adequate as a wrestler, and I don't think that cuts it in AEW.
But yeah, that's a cut. That's a cut from me in this one.
Yeah, so you're making good progress, Adam. You got what, 7 cuts, right? 1, 2. You've cut Sammy Guevara, Phoenix, Max Caster, Jeff Jarrett, Hook, Wardlow, and Buddy Matthews. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so you only got one of these last few guys, and there are some real stinkers on here, Adam. Let me tell you, you're gonna feel
Oh
really
man,
upset for cutting Phoenix earlier. Um, that'd be really funny if I backloaded it with just like a bunch of crappy wrestlers. Um,
That would be
number,
funny, actually.
yeah, number 13 is Penta. We already talked about Phoenix. Do you feel significantly different about Penta than you do about Phoenix, who you already cut?
Yes, actually. I think Penta has much more solo potential. One, because we've seen it before in Lucha Underground. Like he was the highlight of Lucha Underground. Like that was his show. Like he was incredible
It's a long time
on
ago.
that. It was, but the thing is they've never done that with him in AEW. They like, yeah, they called him like Penta Oscuro or whatever it was, right? Like, but they still presented him exactly the same way. He just like wore slightly different uh he just like wore slightly different attire, or maybe painted his face a little bit differently, had different
Hey,
music.
Alex Abrahantes was very different.
uh, Speaking of people on the cut list, um yeah. So, but Penta's someone I really, and he showed it very briefly, right? Remember, he had that weird like 2 week program with Cody, like when Cody was
Yeah, he did the
around.
whole arm break, gimmick that he did in
Yeah,
Lucha Underground.
like they've never really gone that way with him, just like as a solo act, and maybe that's because he wants to, stick together with his brother. They still want to be a tag team act, the same way the Young Bucks do. And hey, that's fine if that's really what they want. But I think he definitely has untapped potential as a singles act, and he's definitely going to be on my keep list. But I will say though, in reality, I think he could be someone that, like, if WWE made him a good offer, he might be well served to take it. I think he could do really well there because, one, he's spooky and they love spooky guys over there, but also just he's so charismatic. Like, I think he could fit very easily into like the WWE
The LWO.
presentation. Well, that's the risk, right? Is he just, but he's much more unique than those guys, and I think that there's always a chance. Like, look, I'm never going to say like, oh yeah, go to WWE. There's, everything's going to work out great. Absolutely, for sure. There's always risk that you just end up like stuck in a go nowhere act, and like you're just like another guy in the mix. But he's someone who's just so unique. I think he he does stand out, and he would stand out anywhere. So yeah, for that reason, he's definitely on my keep list. Even if in reality, similar to Ricky Starks, I think he might be someone who leaves later this year.
Yeah, I do wonder, like, you're not the first person to talk about, how big of a role he had in Lucha Underground as like a top singles guy. Um, to me, that just seems like that's happened a long time ago, and he's already has such a history in AEW. I don't know if you can just kind of relaunch him within AEW as like a top singles guy. Um, I think that would be difficult just because he's been exposed for so long in the company. I do think that he has, really good charisma, really good crowd connection. Um, I do agree in the sense that I think if he went to WWE, I think like the whole Zero Miedo thing is like perfect for WWE. That's all he would have to do. He'd come out, do the Zero Miedo, and have like a 2.5 star 5 minute match, and people would talk about him as like a superstar.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
so like an LA Knight and Penta tag team, just selling tons of merchandise and in every crowd chanting yeah and doing the Zero Miedo. Like I think that's just really obvious stuff. Him and him and him and Jey Uso just going back and forth in the match. One of them going heat and one of them going Zero Miedo. It's writes itself really.
do you remember the match? Do you remember the match that was it? This was a long time ago, and I'm sure like I'm gonna get killed for this if I'm not remembering the right guys. But I believe it was Kenta Kobashi and Kensuke Sasaki had that crazy match where they chopped each other like 100 times, where it was just chops back and forth relentlessly. And I think there was another match a couple of years ago where
Is
like
this the Noah? Is
Ibushi,
that the Noah Dome show?
I can't remember exactly what show it was on, but it was a very when it happened, like everyone was talking about it, where they just chopped each other back and forth endlessly. And then there was a G1 match a few years ago, probably more than a few years ago now, where it was Kota Ibushi and Taichi,
Yeah,
and
the
they
kick
just kicked
match.
each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just picturing like Penta and Jey Uso just going yeet,
One
just
of them
doing their
just yeah.
catchphrases back and forth, and that is the match until I don't know, like maybe two other guys run it, it's a disqualification, but just everybody loving it and thinking it's the most amazing thing they've ever seen. But
It's the
yeah, I think
full evolution of the WWE product.
yes, yes, it's come full circle. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a like a video game match where you just taunt to raise your special bar up.
Oh yeah, and then just one guy hits one move and they win. Like
Yeah.
yes, that could totally be it. I could totally picture that happening. And I'm not even doing this as like, oh, let's make fun of WWE. Like I could actually see that happening like in a
Yeah.
TV match or something. Like it's not like out of the realm of possibility
Yeah.
that someone could
Especially
just
if
come up with that.
put it in like one of those European cities that they've having some of these events at where like the crowd is just really into everything. Doing
Yes. You know,
doing their own little chants. Have it take place one of the in there. It takes place at like, like Elimination Chamber 2027.
fit in perfectly. Yes. That's the perfect crowd for it. The absolute perfect crowd.
Yeah. All right, so you're keeping Penta. Number 14, someone that you and I, Adam, have argued about extensively in AEW, and especially before he was in AEW. And this is Adam Copeland. How do you feel about Adam Copeland and all the TV time he's sucked up since coming into AEW?
I think he's done better than I think anyone expected, right? Like even I was always more open to him joining AEW than others were
Yeah,
because
we had a lot of debates about like I was pretty much like AEW really doesn't need an old WWE guy. I've hated his work since he returned from retirement in WWE. I don't think he's going to be better in AEW when he has more creative freedom. And at the time, you were very much like, uh, I think he's smart enough to adjust to what's gonna work in front of the AEW audience. He's not gonna be like spotlight constantly going to that place level, Adam Copeland. Um, and I'll take the L on that one because he has been way better than I thought he was gonna be when he came in. And I think he's been a hugely positive contributor to the company since coming in.
yeah, I agree. I always thought he would be smart enough to know like recognize the differences in the audience and adjust accordingly. Part of that is because he did not come from modern WWE. Like I mean, he was wrestling in WWE in the 90s. You know, it was a much different era that where guys did have more control over the words that they said in their promos and, influencing their storylines and that type of thing. And he was always like a very smart, I would say, wrestler in terms of the promos he would cut and the angles he would kind of take in his storylines and how he developed his character. So I always thought because I had seen him do it before, in a very different system, WWE in the 90s and early 2000s, again, much different than in the 2010s. I was like, oh, he could definitely have success, from on the mic and as a character in AEW. What surprised me was physically how much he still had left, and because the matches that I saw in WWE were kind of plodding and slower and a lot of like long pauses to make faces at the camera type thing. And so I just thought maybe he was a little bit too physically shot, and that was my concern. But like, all right, if he's not going to wrestle that many matches, right, he can probably still bring it when he needs to. But then he just wrestled like almost every week. He was doing something physical, and the matches were really good. In addition to the promos and the storylines, made sense and were fun and entertaining. And yeah, it was really cool to see him and Christian like get to do their breakup feud that they got to do 20 years ago. But now they actually got to do it when they were both a lot older and a lot smarter. So it was pretty cool. Hopefully his recent injury like doesn't hamper him physically and he's still able to have the same quality of matches that he did before he got injured. But yeah, I'm definitely looking, and there's also just so much more meat on the bone in terms of him having his tag team reunion with Christian and getting like that type of run together. I think you know they just seem like they both have a lot more left in the tank than the Hardy Boys did. And also just creatively
That's not
and their
saying much.
well, yeah, that's true. But also just like creatively and being able to cut promos and stuff, there's just so much more you can do with them from a storyline perspective, as well, even if they do start to slow down more physically. So yeah, I'm definitely his run's been, even better than I thought it could have been so far, and definitely interested in seeing it continue in the future.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. He's been a really positive asset in terms of his performance and um I think that there's a lot of stuff he can do, and he's going to come back from this injury. And hopefully he's not physically shot, but I think it'll be a helpful. It's in hindsight like a good thing to get him off television for a little bit, and come back, get a big pop, and reset from there. I'm sure they have plans for what he's going to do when he returns. Um, Number 15, perhaps the most divisive person on this entire list. In fact, some would say that the exercise was entirely designed to talk about this one person. Do you know who this person is, Adam?
Chris Jericho.
It's Chris Jericho, correct.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep Chris Jericho, and this is why.
Cancelled. No, I'm just kidding.
This is why. Like, I'm actually enjoying the learning tree thing now. Like when it first started, I was like, boy, this is really dumb. And then as it's gone on, I just find myself laughing at the things he's doing. And Bill's been perfect. Like Bill, like just slapping the walls of a building and commenting on its structural integrity. Like I don't know why I found that so funny, but it was hilarious.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bill's been really good in his role doing this.
Yeah,
And I and
yeah.
I'm kind of in the same boat in terms of I thought he was I never was like, I need Chris Jericho to retire and go away, but I was like, I was definitely in the vein of like, I think AEW would maybe benefit if Jericho wasn't on TV every week in that time, and that his designated slot on every pay-per-view card was dedicated to someone else getting like a significant singles match. Um, but I do think that he has successfully done something to get himself over. I have enjoyed his work, and I have found his promos very funny. I thought his promo after he lost the match at Forbidden Door and came out and talked about Hook stealing his finish, and that doesn't work for him, brother. I thought all that stuff was super funny. Maybe it's like too inside baseball, and it's not gonna connect with like the masses. But I think him leaning into the kind of reaction he's gotten from the fans has been another example of his ability to kind of adapt to what he needs to do to remain over and a success in wrestling.
Yeah, I mean the thing, I mean it's so cliche to say about Chris Jericho, but he's kind of, one of the best. He's probably the best in the history of wrestling at reinventing himself. But he really understood that, okay, these people are sick of me like being like a serious act. Like they even if I'm a heel, I'm not necessarily going to get the good type of heat, right? But
Hmm.
so what he did was he pivoted to, oh, I'm just going to do comedy again, because he's had a number of characters over the years. Like, when he was with Kevin Owens, that was a highly comedic character. When he was in WCW, he was a highly comedic character for part of that run. And so like, oh, I'll just be a comedy guy again, make people laugh, and then maybe some of them will still hate me, but other people I can win over with comedy. And he's not doing anything that's like at the top of the card, that he's not in a spot that you're like, oh man, I really wish I'd see someone else in that spot. Like no one cares about the FTW title, really. So it's just kind of like, okay, this is just kind of like a comic relief, portion of the show, which, there's definitely an argument AEW does too much of that. And, maybe he doesn't need to be as take up as much TV time as he does. But that's more of like a booking criticism or question than it is like, okay, do we want to have like Chris Jericho in the promotion and doing this act? Because my answer to that is definitely yes.
He's still a positive contributor in terms of ratings and things like that, which is obviously valuable to AEW. I do think that's like he does get a lot of TV time, and he has those matches on every pay per view, and it's like at some point someone else does need to get put in that role. Um, and we're much closer to that point than we were 3 or 4 years ago. Um, So we are getting there. I don't think we're quite there yet, where it's like the company would be super better served without Jericho being in there. And he's despite what some people seem to believe, he is not protected really at all in terms of wins and losses. He puts tons of people over. He puts younger X over. He lost to Hook at Forbidden Door. Um, he so yeah. I mean, I would keep him around, and he has been phased down. Like I don't. He's never gonna win the world title again. I don't think. I don't think he's
No,
probably ever gonna main event a pay per view again, at least in a singles match. Um, I think that phase of him in AEW is over. So yes, he still gets a lot of TV time. Yes, he still gets a lot of creative focus, but he has been phased down a bit in a way that I think is healthy for the company.
agreed.
All right, so number 16 is Powerhouse Hobbs. We've kind of talked about him a few times in passing, but how do you feel about Powerhouse?
Lukewarm on Hobbs. He's someone who, honestly, I'm not going to repeat the whole Wardlow and Hook thing that I talked about, but
Hmm.
I feel similarly about him as I do about them, where I do think he definitely got sabotaged by like egregiously bad booking. Like he was building up momentum during his Wardlow feud and like post breakup with Ricky Starks and he was just squashing guys. Like he had that cool entrance, remember, where they like whatever the chandelier thing, like they would pull up, and it was he was kind of be kneeling down there. And he really seemed like very menacing. But then like they stuck him with QT Marshall, who had just been like this comedy geek manager for so long. It was just such a bad pairing. It was the last thing Hobbs needed. It was just like tying an anchor to him. And with the joining the Don Callis family, like, oh, okay, maybe this will pick up a bit. But then he kind of seemed like he got lost in the mix a little bit there as well. And he's not the best wrestler in the world. Obviously, like he's solid, but he's not. If you're ranking him like relative to the roster, he's definitely in the bottom half,
Hmm.
for sure. But with all that said, I do think he hasn't been as exposed as Wardlow in terms of I would say that like they pushed Wardlow so hard for so long, and then for it not to work out, it's kind of like makes it really difficult for them to do that again. I think Hobbs is someone they could push like focused and sustained, and at least build him up to be like, maybe probably not like a pay-per-view headliner, but you can build him up to something pretty significant where he can have like a big TNT title feud or he could win matches in like the Continental Classic or something. Like I definitely think there's more that you can do with him because he hasn't had like a big run that failed. He's more just had like a bunch of start and stops and never really gotten like the full opportunity where they kind of went all the way with him. So I think for that reason, I think there's more left on the table with him. So I'm gonna keep him.
Yeah, I think that he has not been as exposed as Wardlow certainly is. I agree that does he need to have a heel mouthpiece manager? Because I don't think that's worked out for him at all in
No,
various
and I don't.
incarnations.
I think it undermines his character, honestly, because he's like, I thought Team Taz was great. Team Taz was perfect. It was a perfect introduction for him. Like, all that was
Hmm.
great. But all the managers he's had since then, like, they weren't his manager. He was in a group that was like managed by someone. So he was just kind of like another guy in the group organized by this manager. Now I guess obviously like he was at a different stature than what was QTV and that whole he was definitely
Yeah,
the top guy in QTV, but you don't want to be the top guy in QTV, like
especially when he was supposed to be getting his big push. It was just a
yes,
bad
yes.
confluence of those two things. Um, he's got a great look. He's a really just like if you were just to like list his height and weight, he wouldn't necessarily like stand out super well, but he's just so um like extremely proportioned, like in his shoulders and his chest. It's kind of like Brock Lesnar, where like Brock Lesnar's like listed at like, I don't know, like 6'3", 290, which is like really big, but not necessarily gigantic in wrestling terms. But Brock Lesnar's got those giant heads and the giant head and those traps and the giant hands. And I feel like Hobbs is kind of like that, where he just has this look where you're like, oh my God, look at this guy. He's a monster. Um, and I do think you could get him going again. I think he has like he's not really a good promo, and he's not charismatic in some ways, but I also think that he has like this street tough aura that people could buy into him. He's not just like Wardlow, who's just kind of like a big guy at a gym.
Mhm.
Hobbs is like got this kind of more um like street brawler kind of character with his attitude that I think could really be a selling point with better charisma. So I wouldn't be entirely
Yeah.
ready on giving up on him.
Did you ever play EWR or Total Extreme Wrestling, like those booking,
No,
those like text-based and
no.
booking games?
I
Okay.
think
So
I've
there,
dabbled with TEW. Like I played it for like a half hour, but like didn't really ever get into it.
okay. So there were different stats for the characters, and if you wanted to give someone a certain gimmick, in order for that gimmick to work, they had to meet certain minimum requirements in the stats.
Hmm.
And one of the stats was called menace. Will Hobbs has menace. That's that's he just has it. Like you believe, like, oh, this guy's tough, this guy's dangerous. Whereas, like, to your point, some other like bodybuilder type guys, you don't necessarily believe that about, but with him, you do. So he has menace, and I think that's a big part of his charisma and potential, and that how he could be successful in a higher profile role than what he has been up to this point.
Hmm. So are you keeping Hobbs?
I'm keeping Hobbs.
Okay, so you've got uh, one more person to get rid of, and
And how many are left?
you have what can I count here? Four people left to get rid of.
Ooh, okay. So I have to count one of the next four people. Okay.
Okay, and the next person is Malachi Black.
Wow. Okay. All right. Now, on one hand, it seems like this should be pretty easy, right? Because he doesn't seem like he wants to be there.
And I think that's a major concession that makes him stand out from other people that we have discussed so far, which is like, does this guy have a crappy attitude about being in the company? Which is, I don't think anything necessarily we can say outright about any of these other people that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, and if it was just like, hey, I'm leaving like at the end of my deal, or it seems like he made it clear like he would like to leave, and tried to, at a certain point. If it was just that, that would be one thing. But then there's always been like some really weird stuff with his booking that makes it indicate that it seems like he is very particular about like who he works with, like when he's willing to do jobs, how he's willing to do jobs. And he's not really like the stature of star that you would, I guess, like put up with that sort of thing for, which is always, and that's kind of a thing with AEW in general. It's not even really specific to him, right? Um, there's other guys as well that it seems like, based on they just kind of like don't put people over, or don't want to do certain storylines and things.
Mhm.
So I don't know. There's obviously always like rumor and innuendo for like, like Conrad Thompson likes to say, about things like that. So you're never totally sure like exactly like what's true and what isn't, but there's enough of a pattern with him where it seems like there's like maybe certain stories aren't necessarily true, but it definitely seems like there's something where you're very limited in how you can utilize him. Now, with that all said, I think he's a fantastic performer. His promos are a lot of nonsense. So that there's definitely a downside to that, but he's really only cutting like, 1 2 minute promos in a vignette. I've always been higher, I think, on his ring work than a lot of others, and I like outside of the spooky promos, I do like his gimmick and everything. I think he has a lot to offer, but yeah, there's just a lot of baggage that comes with him.
Yeah, I think from a talent perspective, he is a great fit in AEW. I think he's a really good worker. I think he could be like a really cool character. I don't think he is anymore. Um, I mean, his debut in the company was excellent with the whole Cody feud. Um, but I just don't think he, as like a person, hasn't really worked out in AEW for whatever reason. Like you said, there's been some weird instances on how he hasn't he's not a top guy, but he kind of gets protected like he's a top guy, but he never really gets pushed as a top guy. It's just kind of interesting dynamic. He's never really had like he's I don't has he ever wrestled for the world title? Um has he ever been in like any of these tournaments? I can't remember. Maybe he was in like the Owen one year, but I don't see him as a guy like who's going to be doing the Continental Classic and going, 500 in that or whatever. Um so I think he had all the potential in the world to be a top guy in AEW, and for whatever reason that is, it hasn't taken off, and he doesn't seem to be particularly happy there.
Yeah, it's disappointing, right? Because that
Yeah,
run when when he started, like he was so cool and people really liked him.
he was
Like
really
people
over in
were,
those buildings. Yeah,
oh yeah, people were cheering him over Cody. Like they were booing Cody and cheering Malachi uh, over that. That was one of the big things where people like, Cody needs to turn heel because he did this angle with Black, and Black just seemed to outshine him. And people, he was new, he was seemed pretty cool, was having a very unique gimmick for sure. But then I think part of what happened though too was a lot of what should have been subtext in his gimmick, or what people found I think cool about him, was that he was just kind of an ass kicker when he first showed up, and then over time he wanted whatever his weird Norse mythology or whatever it is, demonic um things that he likes to talk about in his promos. Honestly, my eyes just kind of glaze over whenever he has like a promo segment, because I don't know what the point of any of it is. I think that fooled him off quite a bit. Um, and kind of put a little bit of a ceiling on him. So like, oh, he can't actually be like this top guy, because like his ideas for storylines aren't things people can connect with, at least not in terms of like a character motivation perspective. But his matches are still really, really good, and his entrance is cool. Like he's got a lot of great things about him. But yeah, if it was just one thing or the other, I think I would still keep him. Whether it was like the silly gimmick, the silly storyline ideas and promos, or the kind of the baggage that comes with booking him. But I think both of those combined make him expendable in a way that someone with his talent should never be. But I think because of those reasons, he's gonna be my last cut.
yeah, and it seems the annoying thing is that I feel like it's really been self inflicted on his end, like the whole promos and the Norse mythology and the Satanist stuff, and wanting to be like a spooky magic guy. Um, it comes across as extra disappointing because I think that like with Bray Wyatt, Wyatt just didn't have like the in-ring ability um to be interesting, so he had to really lean into this shtick. I think if Malachi was just kind of like a more he could still be like dark and mysterious, but more grounded. And because he's got such a good look and he's a good enough he's such a good wrestler and he comes across as convincing and he can come out to his death metal entrance and all that stuff is fine. Um, but just the insistence on like lore and stuff like that, and like you said, storylines where I don't feel like people can really relate to them, uh, has really undermined his potential in AEW. And so
Yeah,
I
it
think
was. I was just gonna say it's actually very similar to Bray Wyatt in that when the Wyatt family first started, like people were really into them,
yeah, it was a really
and
good gimmick at the start. It wasn't it got exposed over time. Um, but
yeah, well, I think the problem was it never went anywhere.
yeah, that's
Like
what I mean.
he,
Like it was a good first idea, but it got exposed and stale over time because it was obvious there was no follow up. Just like there was never really any follow up to the Fiend character. Um,
yeah, exactly. Well, I think with the yeah, with the not to go off on a Wyatt tangent, but I'll tie it back in with Black, where like okay, there's these guys, they're dark, they're putting this group or family together, and then okay, that's all great in terms of like the first chapter, but then they need some sort of like ideology or goals for people to be able to connect with them, to continue to connect with them and be interested in what they're going to do next. And if it,
as
people need to understand,
as pro wrestlers.
yeah, yes, exactly. As pro wrestlers, people need to understand like, okay, there's this dark group, but they need to understand what their motivation is so they can be interested in, okay, what are the twists and turns that are going to happen with them? So like who are they going to attack? Who are they going to try to recruit? And like the House of Black did that to some degree. And I guess the Wyatt family did too, but it never seemed like it really like went anywhere. Like it was always just the status quo, and then they would also just speak in riddles that made them completely unrelatable. So
Yeah,
it just loses steam over time. And it's like we're the whole point of this exercise, right, is talking about like, hey, who are the people who are stale, where maybe they've kind of already their best days in AEW are behind them. And so maybe it's time, maybe even though they still provide value, it's time to give someone else a shot because this just has diminishing returns. And that shouldn't be the case with Malachi Black, but because of all the restrictions he has placed on himself and how he allows himself to be utilized, I think like we kind of have reached that point, or maybe we haven't reached it quite yet. But I think because I do think he still has like a breakup angle with Brody potentially that could be really great and interesting, and maybe there's some other stuff too. But we're definitely I think probably coming close to the end of his run.
yeah, and if we get rid of him, that frees up Brody King to be perhaps more interesting outside of the House of Black Shadow. Um, so you've already hit your mark, but we'll go over the last three guys anyway. Number 18 is Jay White.
Oh, Jay White's tremendous. Absolutely love him. I think he's perfect for American televised wrestling because he can have really strong matches. He can cut promos. He can get heat. He's perfect for American wrestling. Absolutely perfect. And when we were talking about Ricky Starks earlier, one thing that came to mind was Jay White just getting in this. His debut program was like this weird, never-ending feud with Ricky Starks that just kind of went nowhere until
Mhm.
Collision started, and then they actually had like TV time allocated to them on Collision. But yeah, I don't know. He's definitely, I don't want to say EW's dropped the ball on him, but because they haven't, he's always been someone that, like, similar to what I talked about with Kill Switch earlier, he's always had a role, he's always had TV time, and he's also obviously much higher profile than Kill Switch ever was in terms of like where he ranks in the totem pole and in the AEW hierarchy. He's one of the guys who they're like, oh, we really like you, we want to showcase you here, have the trios titles, right? Like just you can be the head of the trios division. But I think he's definitely capable of more than that. And he's someone I think they can really build around in the future. Like the audience always reacts to him, despite maybe, and they do protect him to a degree. Like he's lost very few singles matches. The problem is they just don't like have him beat a lot of like other top stars to say like, yeah, no, he's like at the tippy top. He's kind of like a little bit below that. But I think he's someone they could elevate and make into a bigger deal anytime they want to. He just needs like the right storyline for it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he's been in. If he needs to be in a major single storyline, I think to take him to the next level. It does feel like he's been mostly uh, killing time for whatever reason. Maybe just this is a way to establish him on American TV and then going hard with him. I think when he first signed, there was kind of a widely held assumption that's like, Jay White is probably going to be a world champion one day in AEW. And as it currently stands now, I would say I'd probably bet against that happening.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough for me to say because I think he has the talent for it, and the
Yeah,
audience is always into him. Like
if
he's not
if
someone that, yeah, he's not someone that it's like, oh, they have to rehab. Like he just needs the right storyline and they could pull the trigger on him at any time. He just needs to build some momentum, which, hey, there's a lot of people in AEW that struggle to build momentum, in part because of their booking patterns.
yeah, I would say like if you were to look at like the next 5 AEW world champions, whoever they may be, would you feel confident that Jay White is going to be one of those guys?
Confident, no.
He could be.
Like if I was to
There's a lot
put,
of people that you could make a world champion if you booked them really strong. And they could end up being a convincing world champion. I mean, Samoa Joe ended up being a world champion in AEW. I don't think anyone saw that coming when he
no,
first signed. But when you look at the roster as it's currently constructed, um, it seemed hard to think that Jay White, like if you look at, okay, Swerve's a champion now. Seems like Hangman's probably going to get a run with the championship at some point. Maybe Brian Danielson gets a run with the championship at some point. Then you've got MJF. Then you got Will Ospreay. So those are 4 guys right there. Um, and then that's not counting guys like Okada, who you could slide in to that role, or anyone else that potentially breaks out. So uh, I think it will be tough for him to get there. But you're right in the sense that it's not like they've totally bottled him to the degree that he's just mid card for life. He's relatively protected in that sense. So I agree.
yeah, I
Um,
mean he could really be a right place, right time guy. Like if someone was ever to get injured and they needed a new
yeah,
champion,
like Samoa Joe was.
yeah, exactly. Like he's right there and could easily slide into that role at any time.
Number 19 is someone who I'm sure you're going to be very upset you were going to cut if you didn't waste all your picks earlier. It's John Moxley.
Yeah, no, you have to keep John Moxley.
Right. And I
He's
think I put Moxley on here as an overall uh, extension of the exercise in the sense of Moxley is a true, out of all the guys on this list, like Moxley is a true top guy. And historically in wrestling companies really take off when an established top guy leaves and you're forced to push someone into that spot. So there are other people you could pick in AEW who are top guys, but I think Moxley, because he's been there since the launch of the company, he's been super reliable, but he's also been on television all the time. He's probably hit his ceiling as a draw in AEW. If you were to take him off away from the company and insert somebody else into that John Moxley role, that is a very, very prime piece of real estate that even one of these other guys that you think you could push really hard, like a Jay White, could slide into, um, and do that if you wanted to get rid of John Moxley. So that's why I put him on here. Obviously, he's a more valuable asset than almost anyone else on this list. So I didn't expect people to be like, oh yeah, cut him. But I do think that his role being so big, that is a big spot for someone else to step into if they chose to do that. And historically, that is what has needed to happen. Usually because a wrestler moved to another company or a wrestler had to retire suddenly or got fired all of a sudden. Um, that's how wrestling companies have taken off historically. But I just wanted to include him for the purpose of that exercise. This exercise.
Well, I think your point's very valid that he's been around since the beginning and he's done everything he could do, right?
Yeah, like
Like
he's
so
someone that would move on in the territory days. Would even though he's still popular in a territory, would move on to somewhere else and be a draw somewhere else, and someone else could move into that spot.
yeah, so I think with him, he's probably not so much not Jericho now, but I think he's someone who maybe instead of him being like the focus, he starts getting utilized in ways that like get other people over. Like maybe he
Yeah,
has like a trios title run, and then they do a breakup feud, and there's so much different things you can do, so many different things you can still do with him, and he has so much equity built up in him that it like anything he does is going to matter to that audience. But yeah, I could see it being him being less of a focus, like at the absolute top of the card, or at least, maybe he is for like maybe he's like a few months a year, he's back at the top, right? And they kind of like move him down, then build him back up, give him some time off, bring him back. Like I think he's always going to be, like a really important figure. And there's a lot of kind of different ways they can use him, but I think the idea of like him being like the tippy top guy and continuing to build the company around him, or going back to what he was doing in like 2021, 2022, I think that time's probably come and gone. But yeah, there's still so much value he offers, and still so much you can do with him.
Yeah, and I do think he has been moved down the card a little bit. I mean, he hasn't been super prevalent on AEW television recently, I think in part because he's been the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. Um, but he is someone that is maybe he'll probably main event another pay-per-view from now, but
Oh,
he
for
does
sure.
seem like he's definitely not as he's not one of like the top 3 guys in the company as it currently stands. Which is a position he's pretty much held consistently since he first joined AEW. So the last person on here is Billy Gunn, which I thought would be really funny.
God damn it.
Uh, if yeah, that's right. So you're cutting Phoenix and keeping Billy Gunn. Unbelievable.
Wait, can I still cut Billy Gunn? Can I cut
Yeah, you can
9?
still
Is that
cut.
it?
Yeah, yeah, you can cut Billy Gunn
All right.
because
Well, he's done.
yeah,
Cutting 9. Billy
because
Gunn's gone.
Billy Gunn, again, not with the understanding that this is not taking into role and not and taking into account anything that he's doing behind the scenes in AEW. But like in terms of like an actual negative entity on the product right now, I think he would rank number 1 in terms of this list for me. Because I think we were talking about the Acclaimed earlier when we were talking about Max Caster. Like, I think a huge problem is like how prevalent Billy Gunn is in that team. Like, and how like it went from being like this kind of cute little story to being like, okay, now Billy Gunn is just like clinging on to relevancy with his tag team, and it's not really that funny anymore. And he looks good, but he can't really move. Like, I remember I went to the last Dynamite I was at in Boston. The Acclaimed came in to do a run-in save, and like watching Billy Gunn run down the ramp was not good. Like, I was like, okay, this is clearly a man like in his early 60s because he looks, if we're judging by like just like looking at them and like with their shirts off, he looks great, but like he just can't move anymore, and it's a lot. It's a lot. But I thought it'd be
Yep.
funny if what I really wanted to try to get out of it was, and you definitely avoided it. So it's credit to you, but I wanted you to be like, oh, I don't know if I want to cut John Moxley. I don't know who number 20 is going to be. What if it's like Will Ospreay or someone? Maybe I have to cut John Moxley, and then it ended up being Billy Gunn. Um,
That was
uh,
that was that was a good plan. That was a good plan. Honestly, Billy Gunn would, yeah, he'd be someone I would proactively cut or take. I just don't. Why are they protecting him too? Like he had that match where he kicked Jay White's ass, and then for
yeah,
most of it, like
it's
what is
legitimately
going
harmful.
on?
It's legitimately harmful. I don't
Yeah,
know. So your cuts in so I'm gonna go through them again. So Kill Switch, you're keeping. Samoa Joe, keeping. Cutting Sammy Guevara, cutting Ray Phoenix, cutting Max Caster, keeping Ricky Starks, keeping Brody King, cutting Jeff Jarrett, cutting Hook, keeping Pac, cutting Wardlow, cutting Buddy Matthews, keeping Penta, keeping Adam Copeland, keeping Chris Jericho, keeping Powerhouse Hobbs, getting rid of Malachi Black, keeping Jay White, keeping John Moxley, and as a bonus, cutting Billy Gunn. Would you change any of
yeah.
that now that you have the whole list?
I would keep. So if I can take back one guy that I cut to because of the quota, I would take back Ray Phoenix. He would be the
Hmm.
one I would take back.
Would you
But
change anything
yeah,
else?
no, I actually feel really good about everything else. And Ray Phoenix was someone I think you could tell. Like I didn't want to cut him. It was
Yeah,
just like,
but
all
you
right,
didn't know
I'm
who
going
else
to
was going to be on the list, which was part of the kind of fun we were having here.
exactly. But yeah, that's the only thing I would change. Otherwise, I'm really happy with all the decisions.
Yeah, I'll tell you, like my cut list. Now, of course, I had the luxury of knowing all the people on the list, so mine is a tiny bit different than yours. But I cut Killswitch, I cut Sammy Guevara, I cut Jeff Jarrett, I cut Wardlow, I cut Buddy Matthews, I cut Hobbs, I cut Malachi Black, and I cut Billy Gunn. And I believe the people I kept that you did not would be I kept Phoenix, I kept Max Caster, and I kept Hook. But other than that, we're pretty close. And I think I don't know people playing at home. I think some of these mid card guys, people maybe have strong different opinions on. Um, but it's all in the goal of having some healthy churn on here. And I wanted to was there anyone that we haven't discussed at all that you would like to see cut or you would consider to be on this list that and I have some reasons that maybe I'll get into after I hear who you think of why I didn't put them on here. But is there anyone that you were like expecting to see that you didn't hear?
I was expecting to see Brian Cage as a because he's someone who's been around for a long time, and he's kind of been in the same spot
Mhm.
for and he gets a lot of TV time actually. Now he's never really prioritized or pushed, but he's just someone who's kind of always been around. And I think maybe that's why you didn't include him, is just because all right, like he's around a lot, but they don't really focus on him. So I think this exercise was more like, hey, who should they really be focusing on?
Yeah, I think he could have fit in here. Um, But I had 20 spots, so there are some people, yeah, like Brian Cage. Like I really didn't want to put on. I did put on Ricky Starks and Samuel Guevara, but I didn't want to put on like guys who we just haven't seen in forever, like Keith Lee and Miro. Um,
Yeah, that
just
makes it
because
too easy. Yeah, I think
yeah,
everybody
like
knows they're both gone. Like whenever their contracts
I'm not sure
expire,
Keith Lee. I think we might see Keith Lee again.
we might. I don't. I'll just put it this way. Yeah, we might see him again because if he heals up, maybe they find something to do with it. Like
I mean,
he's still gonna have the swerve match, right? Is that
yeah, I
actually
mean,
ever
just
gonna
bring him in
happen?
as a heel, have him squash the shit out of Swerve, and then have them like he doesn't maybe not in a match, but like you could just have him beat up Swerve, and that's it. And then you do a little program, and then he can leave. But yeah, Miro, I don't think we're seeing again. Um,
No. I don't know. Part of me hopes the Keith Lee and Swerve match doesn't happen, and then Keith Lee is constantly like cutting indie angles, talking about Swerve to try to get him on like some other shows, some other
mhm.
place. I
Yeah,
don't know. I'd find
and I
that funny.
wasn't. Yeah, and like I mean, you could. I put John Moxley on there, but I didn't want to put anyone else who was like a really obvious yes. Like I wasn't going to waste the time with like Will Ospreay or like Kenny Omega or Konosuke Takeshita or anyone that would seem pretty ridiculous to cut at the moment. Maybe some people are missing some of their people. Maybe some people want MJF to go away, but I don't think that makes really any logical sense. If you're trying to be at least a little
Okay,
bit objective.
there is. I just pulled up the AEW roster page. There is actually someone else that I would cut because I'm just tired of seeing them, and it's like they always end up disappointing me, and I'm just not interested in watching them anymore. And that's Serena Deeb.
Yeah, I didn't wanna include any women just because I think that would like, I didn't wanna mix in the men's division and the women's division or do full tag teams, but she did come to mind in terms of someone that I think has just reached a ceiling and has been, like, especially in her promos, just been really bad, frankly. Um,
She's gotten lots of opportunities. Sometimes she's done pretty well. Other times it just like totally flopped. And I think I totally get like her role in the women's division. I think was a very important one for a while because they only had so many women that could do like decent TV matches
mhm.
early on. But we are so far past that now. They have a lot more depth than they did a few years ago, and she just kind of feels out of place now. Yeah, so that's kind of my feelings on that. But in general, I think honestly, this exercise was pretty fun because like it was really tough even to make most of the cuts that I did, and I'm like, oh yeah, I could definitely see like using this person, and I think everybody offers value, in one way or another, and they all could play prominent roles in the future, if they needed to. But some of them are just might be a little bit more of an uphill battle, than it would be with others, and you always need to keep things fresh and just move in some fresh acts and move out some other ones that might have already peaked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of the point, and I think it went really well. And hey, it helps establish some sort of record, so we can come back. We can do this next year, and maybe next year we'll talk about like, remember when we were both going to cut Samuel Guevara, and now he's like the biggest star in the company. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen over the next year, but the chances are one of these people that were like one on the chopping block might be in a totally different position that makes them seem like they couldn't possibly be cut.
Yeah, and
After
we can celebrate after the Yeet versus Zero Miedo thing actually happens.
I'm gonna be victory lapping. Like I kept Max Caster, who is now the biggest draw in all of wrestling, Adam, and you wanted to get rid of him.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah. So I'm working on a column right now. It'll come out eventually. I'm still doing some research, but it's about AEW booking patterns and wins and losses, and maybe how that impacts TV and like people's like how important they think watching AEW TV on a weekly basis is. So I'm not sure exactly when that'll be done, but probably sometime in the next month or so. And then I'm also working on a some Hall of Fame content. So I'll actually write some columns this year for Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame season, whenever that is, usually sometime in the fall. So yeah, doing some research and preparing to write some stuff for that.
We're getting closer to Hall of Fame season. It's really it's probably like I don't know a few months from now maybe. Start thinking, start getting ready for the new ballot, and I mean I'm excited about it. I mentioned I'm
Yeah.
probably going to vote for Samoa Joe. I have a new philosophy for the Hall of Fame.
Ooh. Okay. All right. I'm intrigued. We don't want to spoil it now, but I'm definitely intrigued to hear about it when the time comes.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Adam. I appreciate for you being around to do the show. I want to thank all of my listeners, and we'll talk to you again after a while. Thanks.